Welcome to a new video in my channel, and I wanted to give you an update on the progress I'm making on my 7¼ inch loco, and I want to talk about some 3D printed parts that I'm designing for this loco. So, well, first of all, I wanted to minimize the amount of laser cutting and the metal that is used in the loco because, well, first of all, I think it's heavy enough already, and I have a 3D printer, so it would be cheaper for the whole project if I can do some 3D printed parts. And I thought that maybe I can, 3D print these sand boxes that I'm going to mount on the bogies, and I can also 3D print some horns, and for the lights I can do some fixtures. And this is what I've done so far, and this is what I want to talk about in this video. If you are a regular on my channel, you probably know that I order PCBs from PCBWay for some of my electronic projects. But since I'm talking about 3D printing, I also wanted to mention that PCBWay actually does 3D printing services as well. And as you can see, not only 3D printing services, but there are like CNC machining services, sheet metal laser cutting and bending, and injection molding services. But let's just talk about 3D printing since that's the subject of the video. For me, it doesn't make sense, well, for this particular project, it didn't make sense to use their services because I was, constantly making changes to these models. So it's just much quicker and easier for me just to reprint them and then, make changes, reprint them. So test the new 3D prints or the objects and make iterative changes to it. But for example, I only have an FDM printer. I don't have a different technologies like a resin printer. So in the future, if I want to do something in resin, I can do all the design. Maybe I can just do a test print on my 3D printer, and I can use PCBWay to order let's say the SLA print, or even different technologies, or even materials that I don't have, because I print everything from PLA. And I think I am comfortable using PLA. I don't know how I would, the settings that I would need to use with ABS or PETG or TPU. I don't think they are, really difficult to understand, but, well, this is how I operate. So I wanted to use a 3D printer which is, ready to run. It is configured for one material, and I can just use that material for most of my projects. So I'm not too interested in 3D printing just to start playing around with different materials and settings for this. So in certain projects, it might be just easier for me just to create a test print on my machine and then use some other services to print from different materials, or let's say resin. But as you can see, you can even choose metals here. It's like aluminum or stainless steel or tool steel. That could be really interesting for some projects. And for resin, you have these options here, and and upload your drawings, and it will go through the same process as with the PCBWay. With the PCB. So I'm assuming that there would be some validation process, and after that you can just order. And yeah, there are some lead times here, and then probably the same shipping options that you had with your PCBs. So you can either pick DHL express shipping, or slow shipping if it's not that urgent for you. And as you can see, you can upload in the most common formats. So an STL, which probably is going to be the output of the most 3D software, or object or even step files. So if you don't have a 3D printer, or you have a 3D printer but not in the 3D printing technologies that you want to use for some projects, well, you can consider PCBWay to create your 3D prints as well. The one thing I wanted to do here is I wanted to make sure that whatever I create in 3D printing is going to be sturdy enough. So I came up with the idea that I'm going to print everything hollow. So as you can see, I designed the object and I just hollow this around. So I hollow this out, and I have, well, these are just going to be screw mounts. I'm going to mount it on the side of the bogie, but it's hollow. So I thought it's going to be better if I just create a shell in the 3D printing and I fit it up with resin. And so that is going to give it material. So if it gets any, like damage, or I don't know, rocks, or if I have a derailment and it gets, well, it gets hit, then there is a less chance of this breaking and shattering into pieces, which would obviously happen if I would have a thin shells like this. So yeah, I found some two-part epoxy, and I think it is a polyurethane epoxy that, I mean, you know, it's just a normal two-part epoxy. So you just mix the 1-to-1 ratio by weight, but it's the same weight and volume. So I just mixed that with a 1-to-1 ratio by volume, and you pour it in, and then it hardens. So obviously the one thing that I had reservations of is how this is going to look like when it is poured into a PLA 3D print. So this is just a PLA, which I think starts melting around 100 and maybe around 100 degrees. And obviously there is heat getting generated when the resin cures. And I have to say that at least in this size and also in this size, I don't see any you know, changes in the shape. Certainly nothing that I could measure with a ruler. So, and when I poured it, I also had a thermometer. So when I measured in the top of the mold, it was showing about 80 degrees, and on the sides it was showing like 50 degrees. So I think that was definitely below the sort of the point when the 3D print starts to melt. So definitely the sides hasn't warped, and I don't see any impacts. The reason this is great because I already put some Bondo or spray on Bondo and started sanding it down. But that's how it came from the 3D printer. You can see the layers, and the same with the horns. So I just printed them hollow, and there was a basically a hole here, and I was able to just pour the resin inside, and it hardened like this. And as I said, I started sanding it down, and that's how the model looks like now. I was thinking maybe I should also print some holder for these, but I think that's going to be some, you know, thin metal bracket that I can just weld onto the chassis, and probably I'm going to drill a hole here and use a M3 or something just to fasten it. So these are the sandboxes, how it look like. I think there's going to be a handle here from some sort of wire, but you know, so far looking good, and you know, it will get painted to the same color as the bogie, and it will look nice. So I have two done with resin and sanded. That got printed just yesterday. Another one of these is getting printed now, and well, I have 4 horns, so 2 bigger ones, 2 smaller ones, so they are going to be next to each other, something like that. So obviously for both sides. So these are all done and printed. And I also created these brackets for these lights. So I got these small cabinet lights. Actually, I was able to buy one in white and also in red. So these are going to be my lights, like, you know, white and red. And I created this bracket, and it also has a spacer, and then it will get all fixed onto or screwed onto the chassis. So I think I have to do a little bit more sanding, because these are made as you know, for clearance fit. Oh, here you go. So this will get screwed in from the back, and that's going to hold the whole light assembly like that. And I think it looks good. I put some things here, so maybe it's like, you know, sometimes you have these engines that you can have this sort of grill type mesh here that the engineer can stamp on if he wants to clean the windshield from the outside. So, but yeah, it just basically to hold the lights, and yeah, the wires get routed behind that. So I think it looks good. I've already printed a second version. I just need to break off the brim and some of the other infills. But this would get sprayed on as well and then sanded down, so I don't see the layers here. I also started sanding the bare plastic, but I think it's better just to apply the Bondo first, and just to get rid of the print lines and make it a little bit smoother. But you know, so far so good. I'm quite happy how it turned out, and yeah, it was easy print. I think this is, well, each of them is like 6 hours, so I think this about 5 or 6 hours to print this one, and it also took 5 or 6 hours to print this one, because here I used 80% infill, There is not an awful lot of cavity left, so I think for this it makes more sense to print them solid on the 3D printer than to try to fill out all these small cavities, which I think it would be really difficult to do. But if I would have to print this like 80% with 80% infill, I think it would take absolutely like, I don't know, like 2 days or something. And but on the other hand, I'm not sure which one would have been cheaper, because the resin itself is also quite expensive. So yeah, maybe in overall cost, it could be even cheaper to print the entire 3D body in 3D printed material than to buy the resin. Or you just have to shop around for a cheaper resin, because the quality of the resin doesn't even, I don't think it really matters, because it just basically just matter that gives the whole model rigidity. And as you can see, I haven't even bothered with removing the bubbles, because this is not going to be the surface that I see. So I think there's a little bit less bubbles here. And also the fact that I was doing all this in the garage and it was pretty cold here, that probably also helped for the resin not to heat up that much. So this is why I'm trying to do the other two pretty soon, so I can have the resin poured in and set when it is still relatively cold. That probably helps to some extent as well. So I think that's all I wanted to share today. Thanks for watching, and hopefully see you in the next video.